Red Hood, aka Jason Todd, the second Robin, the first Robin to actually die, the living reminder of Batman's greatest failure. Red Hood has gained enormous popularity ever since he was brought back in 2005. It's been nearly 20 years since he was brought back from the dead, but the truth is that DC still has no idea what to do with Red Hood as a character, and that's why the character is broken right now. I'll start off with giving a brief overview of what Jason has been up to over the past 20 years, and I think just hearing that should make it obvious what the problem with the character is. Let's go back to 2005. Jason Todd is resurrected in the Under the Red Hood story, which quickly becomes massively popular, and people seem to love the twist of bringing back Jason Todd as an antagonist to Batman. This story would eventually be adapted as an animated movie in 2010, which follows the comics very closely and in a rare case even proves to be better than the comics. Either way, the movie is extremely popular and it helps expose Jason Todd to a wider audience, and Red Hood's popularity as a rebellious antagonist to Batman and Nightwing quickly begins to grow. But the problem is that DC had really doubled down on Jason Todd as a complete villain after his Under the Red Hood story in 2005. Aside from a few stories where Jason seemed to exhibit his former heroic tendencies, Jason Todd firmly remained as a villain in the comics, tormenting Batman, Nightwing, Robin, and even Green Arrow. He would even take on his own sidekick named Scarlet, as they would team up together to kill criminals without any remorse. Jason would even briefly become Batman in a misguided attempt to take over after Bruce's death. During this period, Jason would repeatedly try to kill other members of the Bat family while continuing his own unique crusade against criminals and villains. When this universe concluded in 2011, Jason and his sidekick Scarlet would head off towards a random destination. Jason Todd, before Flashpoint, was clearly a villain despite his crusade against criminals. But considering Jason's rising popularity, DC decided to reinvent Jason Todd as a character, and the New 52 reboot provided the perfect opportunity to do so. In the New 52, DC would reinvent Jason Todd as a violent anti-hero, but he isn't as crazy as he was before. He seems to be on decent terms with the Bat family and Batman, while still continuing on his own crusade against criminals. Scarlet sadly never got to make a return, but Jason had a new crew of outlaws in the form of Arsenal aka Roy Harper and Starfire. This allowed DC to reframe him as a rebellious anti-hero who simply disagreed with Batman's methods rather than the complete villain he previously was. This meant Jason could have better relationships with the Bat family members even if all of them disagreed with his beliefs and his methods of fighting crime. They would give Jason a magical past and would introduce the Outcast, a weird magical organization that trained Jason Todd. And this allowed Jason to dabble in magic for a little bit. Jason was also a part of Batman Incorporated, which would have been just impossible pre-Flashpoint. He would lose his memories and gain them again, just normal comic shenanigans, but the overall intent was clear. Jason Todd is the wild card of the Bat family. He may randomly team up with the Bat family, but he's not too close with them. He has his own crusade against crime and doesn't mind killing criminals, but that's not his first option anymore like it previously was. It felt like DC had decided that Jason was better off as an anti-hero who disagreed with the Bat family in terms of lethality, but was very much a part of the family. Obviously, people had their own opinions about this change. Some thought Jason was better off being a villain and an antagonist for Batman and Nightwing, and that he didn't really need to be anything more than that. Some thought this was a great change, and this allowed Jason to be his own character and find his own place in the DC universe. It's also worth mentioning that the New 52 Red Hood runs were generally not really very good books. There were some decent moments here and there, but overall they were pretty mediocre, and frankly, nothing memorable, but hey, this was the status quo for nearly 5 years before DC Rebirth happened in 2016. I feel like DC Rebirth is where the problem with Jason Todd as a character really started, even though it wasn't apparent at the beginning. When Rebirth happened, DC would give Jason Todd a new team of outlaws in the form of Artemis and Bizarro, and he even forged a better dynamic with Batman, going so far as to work as Batman's undercover agent in the criminal underworld. He decides to stop killing and not use guns in Gotham, which Batman really appreciates. The new Outlaws book and team was generally praised and received a lot of appreciation, especially during the initial 25 issues of the run. But towards the end of those 25 issues, things would really deteriorate, causing Jason to embrace using a gun again and also fight Batman again. His team's unfortunate disappearance during a mission would force Jason to forge a new path on his own. This meant Jason was now a solo anti-hero who had reverted to using guns as a regular weapon. Jason would also use a crowbar and embrace his violent tendencies. He would subsequently come to a new agreement with Batman where Batman decides to let him operate as a vigilante as long as he doesn't do it in Gotham. But hey, that doesn't really last for a long time. Jason decides to come back to Gotham and become a criminal mastermind once again and has no problems achieving his goals via killing. So obviously he wasn't a part of the Bat family anymore, right? Nope, he would interact with the Bat family in subsequent stories as if nothing had changed. But hey, maybe it was a big deal, maybe it was a massive Joker attack, maybe it was the heat of the moment, so everybody decided to forget that Jason was a criminal and a killer again. Anyways, Jason would get to reunite with the Outlaws again before separating from them once again. And that would mark the end of the Rebirth Outlaws Jason Todd era. Following the end of the Rebirth Outlaws, DC would tackle Jason Todd's status quo in Batman Urban Legends, where he would once again vow to stop using guns and would reconcile with Bruce Wayne once again. In the aftermath of the new worldview Jason Todd has and the death of Alfred Pennyworth, Jason would regularly team up with other Bat family members and regularly hang out with them, which kind of felt like a reflection of the status quo, but they were kind of doing it even before that, so I mean, I don't really know what they were thinking. Anyways, he would eventually be forced to join Task Force Z as their main leader, where he would lead a bunch of resurrected villains. That was actually kind of cool, and it felt like a pretty unique and enjoyable new direction for Jason Todd, and of course, it didn't last. Soon after that, Jason Todd and Batman would end up fighting once again because apparently we hadn't gotten enough of that. Jason Todd would once again go on a crusade against the Joker because obviously that's very original. And of course, he would start using guns again because what's the point of doing a story where he kind of gives up his guns if it's not to set up the next story where he starts using his guns again? Despite all of these weird shenanigans, he kind of remained on friendly terms with some of the Bat family members. I'm not sure how that worked, but he did. When Batman would create the failsafe AI, he would show up alongside the Bat family to fight failsafe. This would also lead to the Gotham Wars storyline, which I think pretty much everyone hated, but that's the story where Jason would be killed and then he would be immediately revived, and then he would end up with fighting Batman again. So, very original stuff. This time, his clash against Batman, who is kind of influenced by Zoranar, which is a weird dimensional robotic thing. I feel like Zoranar is a entirely different topic. Anyways, what you need to know is that Bruce Wayne wasn't exactly in his right mind at that moment, so he would kind of end up mind wiping Jason Todd. And this would obviously it's not it didn't last very long, but when Jason got his memories back, obviously he and Bruce had a very strange relationship once again. And I think the most recent appearance had Jason Todd teaming up with Batman once again to find Damian Wayne, and despite their strange relationship, they seem to be on better terms. I'm not sure how that worked, but you kind of take it as it is. Overall, this is a brief summary of the stories Jason Todd was a part of over the past few years. There are even more stories where he kind of showed up as a guest star or simply teamed up with other Bat family members and other heroes. And in some cases, it would kind of feel weird considering the status quo, and in some cases, it's kind of hard to even understand what Jason Todd is supposed to be at that moment. Is he a non-violent hero? Is he a violent anti-hero? Sometimes it's touched upon, sometimes they don't even mention whether he's using guns, sometimes they just randomly give him his guns, and sometimes the writers just ignore everything that's been told before to tell the story that they want to tell. Which, I mean, that's comics for you. We recently got confirmation that Red Hood will be getting a new series and that he will be killing a lot of people and using guns, and he won't be operating in Gotham anymore. This kind of happens right after his recent team up with Batman, so it's kind of hilarious to think about. I feel like just from my summary, it's kind of obvious what the problem is, right? DC doesn't really know what they want Jason Todd to be, and they repeatedly keep switching his beliefs based on the story some writers want to tell. There's no real proper direction for the character, and there hasn't been one for a very long time. None of Jason Todd's stories, except for the initial Under the Red Hood story, has been truly memorable. I would say I enjoyed the Rebirth Outlaws. It was a lot of fun, and I do consider that impactful and a very good period for the character. But outside of that, Jason Todd's stories are remarkably average at best, which is a damn shame when you consider the kind of character you have been given. There are two possible directions for Jason Todd that DC can take. You can have him as a vigilante who embraces killing and isn't afraid to go up against Batman and firmly stands by his belief that some people are about redemption. That's generally what people think of Red Hood, anyways. That's the base concept of the character people are familiar with. And I don't understand why DC keeps running away from it. I mean, I know why they do it. The problem is that DC also wants him to regularly interact with the Bat family because a lot of people love the Bat family and consider Jason a part of the Bat family, but that can't really happen if he's a relentless killer. The Bat family members generally have very firm morals, which are usually aligned with Bruce Wayne's ideology, and you can't have Jason killing a bunch of criminals and then hanging out with his siblings for dinner as if nothing happened. They did make that happen a couple of times, but I feel like everybody kind of ignores it. But either way, when that happens, that kind of makes everybody look awful. It's certainly not sustainable as an actual status quo. So in that case, the other direction seems like DC should just stop making Jason kill criminals and just make him a proper hero and a member of the Bat family. But if you do that, you kind of lose the purpose of the character, right? I mean, frankly speaking, and just to put it in simple terms and not to be very complex or whatever, I feel like doing that would just turn Jason Todd into a slightly edgy version of Dick Grayson. And I'm not gonna lie, that's kind of really boring. I think that's why it's been really hard for them to stick with their direction whenever they try to do it. You kind of take away the biggest appeal of the character by removing his tendency to kill criminals. And I think that's what DC's at. They know that these are the only two directions, but they've spent the past 20 years trying to go in both directions repeatedly, and it simply doesn't work. They go in one direction and then they go back to the other direction, and it doesn't really help Jason Todd as a character. They know that there are people who would be fine with Jason Todd being a relentless killer and even a villain or a anti hero, and that there are also people who really love him as part of the Bat family. And DC tries to appeal to both audiences, and they kind of end up failing both of those audiences. This is why it's really important that DC actually picks a direction and sticks with it. Whatever they pick, there are going to be people who are going to hate it. This is comics, everything is controversial. There are going to be people who think they made the wrong choice, whatever the choice they decide to pick. But if DC can actually pick a direction and have Jason Todd get some solid stories and some consistent characterization, which is long overdue, I think that could make up for any initial controversy that may result from their decision. But it's only worth it if they actually stick with it. You can't make a big deal about him becoming a killer once again and then having watching TV with the Robins the next month. That makes Jason Todd look really weak as a character, someone who doesn't really care about his beliefs. And it also makes the Bat family look like huge hypocrites. And that's why it's really important DC pick a damn character. My preference would definitely be a Jason Todd who has no problem getting blood on his hands, a Jason Todd who embraces his beliefs and has his own crusade against criminals, whether it's in Gotham or anywhere else. I don't think Jason needs to be as evil or psychotic as he was before Flashpoint, but I think Jason Todd needs to be someone who is an anti hero and someone who kind of teeters on the edge of becoming a villain. I feel like Jason Todd is better off being a man who believes that killing the scum of the earth isn't entirely a bad thing, and that should be in direct opposition to the beliefs held by Batman and the Bat family. And I think Jason Todd should not be a part of the Bat family. Whenever he does interact with them or Batman, they should keep their distance from each other. They should team up and work with each other only if the circumstances are so dire that they need to do it. I think that's the general appeal of Jason Todd as a character. That's what people generally know Red Hood as. And I think that's the status quo writers should use to create new stories for him. And I think it could be really fascinating if DC actually commits to this. But on the other side, I wouldn't mind if they decide to have him guilt up killing and become a part of the family. That would not be my preference, and I think that would be really boring for me. And I think that's kind of a very safe route to take with the character. But at the end, I would definitely appreciate that that's the direction they have chosen and that's the direction they want to stick with. But until DC gets the courage to make an actual direction work for Jason Todd and choose which one it is, I feel like Red Hood will be a fundamentally broken character who will forever be stuck fighting Batman every 2 months and will forever be stuck giving up his guns every 2 months and then getting them back again. And I think Jason Todd is a character who doesn't really stand for anything right now because his morals and beliefs keeps changing every few issues and every few stories, and it's hard to really understand who Jason Todd is as a character. And I think that's what DC should focus on.